They always told me time heals, but they never said it just turns the pain into smoldering embers. They just sit inside, waiting for someone to blow on them. And then everything flares up as if it were just yesterday. I was sitting in my armchair by the window, covered with an old wool blanket that Charles bought me for our 10th anniversary. It was drizzling outside, and the world looked gray and tired, just like me. My old Buick was parked in the driveway, wet and lonely, and in the kitchen, as always, the kettle was quietly gurgling. The air smelled of dust and Folgers coffee, a smell I hadn't changed in about 30 years. It's my anchor, my habit. I've been sitting like this almost every day since he left. My back aches from the dampness, my hearing isn't what it used to be, and the letters in the book blur. I often think I'm turning into a ghost in my own house. You know what real anger is? It's not screaming, not breaking dishes. Real anger is a cold stone in your stomach that you carry for years until it becomes a part of you. And that's how I lived, with that stone. My best friend, Diane, she was like a sister to me. We grew up on the same street. We went to Macy's together, shared secrets about boys, dreamed of houses with white picket fences. She was a part of me. And then, in one evening, it all disappeared. 40 years passed. 40 years of silence. We didn't talk. We didn't see each other. To me, she just stopped existing. Her name became taboo in my house, as if she had never been there. I did everything to forget her, and I almost succeeded. Until the phone rang. My old rotary phone, which I only keep because it reminds me of those times, started ringing. I didn't pick up right away. People only called me by mistake or to sell me something, but the ringing was persistent. It was as if someone knew I was sitting right here in my favorite spot. Hello? My voice sounded hoarse. It's Diane. My heart skipped a beat. It was like a punch to the chest. Her voice as soft and slightly mocking as I remembered it. I almost dropped the receiver. Everything I had so carefully built, all my defenses, collapsed in 1 second. What do you want, Diane? My voice was as cold as a winter wind. I need you to do something for me. It's the last thing I'll ever ask of you. I know you don't want to see me anymore, but I'm dying. She's dying. Those words hit me harder than I expected. In that moment, I felt no schadenfreude, just a dull, aching pain, old and familiar. All my anger and resentment suddenly seemed so small and unimportant. She asked me to come to her house, to pick up a box I had once seen in her attic but never knew what was in it. She said this box, it didn't belong to her, but to a person who meant so much to me. And I didn't know then that this simple box was just a key to the truth that Charles and Diane had buried many years ago, a truth that would change everything I believed in. I just couldn't have known it back then. I still don't know why I agreed. Maybe because of her voice, maybe because of the feeling that we had some unfinished business, or maybe just because my quiet, predictable life suddenly seemed unbearable. And if you listen to stories like this, as much as I love to tell them, you know where the button is. I think they call it a subscription. Would you have gone to find out a truth that could destroy everything you have left? I went, and it was the biggest or the worst decision of my life. That phone call didn't just come from another city. It came from another lifetime. The one before the silence. The one when our lives were all tangled up together like threads in a sewing box. Diane and I, we were inseparable. From the time we were little girls playing with our dolls on her porch swing to gossiping in the bleachers at high school football games. Her parents' house was my second home, and my mother's kitchen was hers. We were the kind of friends who finished each other's sentences and knew what the other was thinking just from a look. And then there was Charles. He was a few years older, the charming boy with an old Buick who worked at his father's auto shop. He was all smooth talk and quick smiles. We both fell for him, of course. Who wouldn't? But he only had eyes for me. He brought me flowers he'd sneak from his neighbor's garden and took me to the movies every Friday night. Diane was happy for me. At least that's what she said. The last time we were all together, I remember it so clearly. It was a Sunday afternoon. We were at my parents' house having Sunday brunch. Mom had made her famous apple pie, and the smell of cinnamon filled the house. Charles was telling a funny story about a customer, and Diane was laughing, her head thrown back, a sound that always made me smile. She was wearing a simple blue dress, and on her lapel, she had a small silver pin. It was shaped like a key. I remember thinking it was strange because Charles had given her that pin just a week before, as a thank you for helping him with some paperwork. I remember watching them both, sitting there in my living room, the sun coming through the window, making dust motes dance in the air. Charles reached over and put his hand on Diane's knee for just a second, a quick, innocent gesture. Just a friend, I told myself. She didn't flinch, just smiled at him. A knowing smile that made me feel a strange chill even on that warm day. I bought that dress at Macy's back in '92. We had folders in the cabinet, like always. But that look, it stuck with me. A small, seemingly meaningless thing. A whisper in a quiet room. I didn't think much of it then. I was too happy, too much in love. I knew they were close, after all. They were my two favorite people in the world. I never had a reason to doubt them. But now, all these years later, sitting here in my quiet house, I can still see that moment. I can still see that look. It was the moment before everything broke, the moment before I knew anything, the moment before the lie became our whole life. And that little silver key pin, the one Charles gave her, the one I didn't choose, what did it really unlock? What if the anger, the blame, the pain I carried all this time was aimed at the wrong person? My old Buick started with the familiar groan, a sound like a tired man getting out of bed. It was a sound I knew well. The squeak of the wipers against the wet glass was a rhythm I'd driven to 1,000 times. But this drive felt different. The rain was the same, the streets of our quiet suburb were the same, but the destination, it felt like I was driving into a ghost story. My hands were tight on the steering wheel. I could feel the cold stone in my stomach again, the one that had been sleeping for 40 years. It was awake, and it was churning. I kept replaying our last conversation. Diane's voice, frail but somehow still familiar. I'm dying. It felt like a lie, an excuse. But her tone, there was no sarcasm, no bite, just a deep, bone-weary sadness. It was the same tone I heard in my own voice some mornings. What could she possibly want from me now? After all this time, after the anger, the years of silence, I kept telling myself I was only going because I couldn't bear the thought of not knowing. It was a morbid curiosity, an itch I had to scratch. That's what I told myself. It was easier than admitting I was going because a small, desperate part of me still remembered the girl who used to be my best friend. Her house was on the other side of town, in a newer part of the suburb, but it was just as ordinary. A simple 2-story colonial with a perfectly manicured lawn. I pulled into the driveway. My tires crunched on the gravel, a sound that felt too loud in the sudden silence of the car's engine. I took a deep breath. My heart was pounding, a frantic drumbeat in my chest. The porch light was on, casting a yellow glow on the front door. I walked up the 3 steps, my knees protesting with a familiar ache. I rang the doorbell. I waited. 1 minute, 2, then nothing. The silence was so thick I could almost taste it. I was about to turn and leave, to tell myself I had done my part, when the door slowly opened. It was her, but it wasn't the Diane I remembered. The vibrant woman with the bright laugh was gone. In her place stood a fragile old lady, her skin like parchment, her eyes sunken but still holding that familiar spark. She was wearing a simple house dress and slippers. She looked at me, and a tired smile touched her lips. "You came," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You said you were dying," I said, my voice harsher than I intended. "Oh, Helen," she said, shaking her head. "Always so direct." She gestured for me to come in. The house smelled of old books and disinfectant. The air was heavy. In the middle of the living room floor was a cardboard box. It was a plain, unremarkable box taped shut with brown packing tape. "This is it," she said, her voice strained. "The thing I needed you to get." She struggled to kneel down, and I instinctively reached out to help her, then stopped myself. The years of resentment were a physical barrier between us. She managed to grab the box, her hands trembling. You need to give this to Walter," she said, looking me straight in the eye. "To your son." My stomach dropped. Walter? What did any of this have to do with my son? He was a successful architect, a good man with a family of his own. He lived his life in a city 3 hours away. He was not part of this mess. I felt a surge of anger. "What do you mean, Diane? What is this? What does Walter have to do with you?" She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "I can't tell you. You need to give it to him. Don't open it. Just tell him it's from me." She looked at the box, then back at me. He needs to know the truth." She said the last word with such intensity it sent a shiver down my spine. "The truth?" I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. "The truth about his father and me," she said, her voice breaking. Then she looked past me, as if seeing something else, something I couldn't see. "Don't let him make the same mistakes. Don't let him get away with it." I took the box from her trembling hands. It felt heavier than it looked. It wasn't just a box, it was a weight, a burden she was passing on to me. I stood there, speechless, holding this box that held some secret about my dead husband and my son. I just couldn't comprehend it. It was too much. So I had the box. I had the destination. But what was I supposed to do now? Do I follow her dying wish and give my son a box of secrets that might destroy his image of his father, of me? Or do I do what I want? What my heart tells me to do, and open it myself to find out the truth first? I sat in my car in the driveway for a long time, the box resting on my lap. It felt like a ticking bomb. My mind was racing. Give it to Walter. That's what she said. But how could I? How could I just hand over a secret about his father from his dying aunt? I was his mother. It was my job to protect him. To protect him from what, exactly? My own husband's past? I thought I knew everything there was to know about Charles. His jokes, his favorite armchair, the way he hummed when he worked in the garage. His whole life was tangled up with mine. I was his wife. I deserved to know. I deserved to know what lay inside this box before I handed it off to my son. This wasn't just a box of secrets. It was a ghost of a life I didn't know existed. The rain had stopped, and the air was thick with the smell of wet earth and night-blooming jasmine from my garden. I took the box inside, placing it on the kitchen table. the very same table where Walter did his homework as a boy. I stared at the brown tape. The temptation was overwhelming. I tried to think of my son. He was a grown man now, a father himself. He could handle it. But what if he couldn't? What if this secret wasn't a secret he was strong enough to bear? A mother's duty doesn't end when her son turns 40. I grabbed the steak knife from the drawer. The cool steel felt solid in my hand. I wasn't just opening a box. I was opening a door I'd kept shut for a lifetime. The tape came off with a dry, ripping sound. My heart was a frantic bird in my chest. Inside was not a single object, but a small, leather-bound scrapbook. It was old and worn, the leather soft and faded, the pages filled with photos. It looked like the kind of scrapbook a teenage girl might have made. I opened it to the first page, my hands shaking. The pages were filled with pictures of a young Diane and a young Charles. They were holding hands at a fair, their faces lit up by the neon lights of a Ferris wheel. There was a photo of them on a beach, smiling into the sun, a blanket spread out behind them. In every picture, they were together, looking at each other, in a way I had never seen before. It wasn't the look of friends. It was the look of people in love. My stomach twisted. I had seen some of these photos before, but Diane was always in them along with me and other friends. These were different. These were just the two of them. I flipped through the pages, my breath catching in my throat. I saw a picture of them at a small, intimate party, and then a photo that made my world stop. It was a picture of Charles and Diane standing together, their arms wrapped around a young boy of about 4 or 5. The boy had Charles's eyes, and in the background, out of focus, was me, a younger me, holding a birthday cake. It was Walter's 5th birthday, but the boy in the photo, it wasn't Walter. My mind raced back. That day, the birthday party. The house was full of family and friends, but I didn't remember this boy. The picture was clear, though. Charles and Diane looked so happy, so proud standing next to him. But who was he? I looked closer at the boy's face. He was smiling, a shy, sweet smile, and there was a silver key pin on his jacket, the same one I'd seen on Diane's lapel 40 years ago. My hands started to tremble so violently that I had to put the scrapbook down. I sat there staring at the photograph, the old memories of that Sunday brunch coming back to me with a horrifying clarity. The knowing smiles, the pin, the cold stone in my gut had just fractured into a million sharp pieces. My husband and my best friend, they hadn't just been friends. They had a son together. And I was standing there, oblivious, holding a birthday cake for a different child. I felt sick. The betrayal was so much deeper, so much more profound than I could have ever imagined. It wasn't about a fleeting moment or a secret flirtation. It was a whole life, a second life. Now I knew. I had the truth, or at least a piece of it. But what do I do with it? Do I confront Diane on her deathbed? Do I go to my son, the boy I raised, and hand him this box, this terrible, beautiful proof of his father's betrayal? And what does this mean for me, for my entire marriage, for everything I thought I knew? My whole life? It was just a second life to them? A lie to protect the truth? I sat at the kitchen table, the scrapbook open in front of me. I looked at the picture again and again, as if by sheer force of will I could change it. The boy with Charles's eyes, the knowing looks between my husband and my best friend, the silver key pin. It was all a terrible, impossible puzzle. My mind was screaming, but my heart was frozen. This couldn't be right. There had to be a mistake, a misunderstanding. Maybe the boy was a nephew of Diane's, a child I had never met. Maybe the pin was just a trinket, a silly souvenir. Maybe that knowing look was just the two of them sharing a private joke about me and my terrible apple pie. I latched onto these flimsy excuses like a drowning woman clutches a piece of driftwood. It was the only way to stay afloat,
My initial shock was giving way to a desperate need for normalcy, for a reality where my life hadn't been a lie. I closed the scrapbook, the sound echoing in the silent house. I put it back in the box, pushed it under the table, and told myself it didn't exist. I would throw it away. I would burn it. I would pretend that phone call never happened. I would call Walter and talk about his children, his job, anything else. I would go back to being the grieving widow, the mother who had her whole life figured out. The cold stone in my stomach, it was still there, but I was pushing it back down. I could feel the old familiar comfort of denial, the sweet balm of ignorance. It felt good. It felt safe. This was my way out. This was how I would solve everything. I went to the sink and began washing the single tea mug I had used. The hot water felt good on my trembling hands. I was going to be okay. I was going to forget about it. I was going to be the Helen I've always been. The thought of confronting my son with this awful thing, it was too much. He loved his father. He deserved his memories to stay intact. It was a kindness, a mother's final act of protection. The past was in the past. Let it stay there. I wiped down the counter with a cloth, humming a little tune from the radio, one of those oldies from the 60s. I was almost convinced. I was almost back to normal. But then, I noticed a piece of paper sticking out from the back of the scrapbook. It must have been tucked between the pages, hidden from view. My heart skipped a beat, but I told myself it was nothing. An old recipe, a receipt from Macy's. I dried my hands and, with a deep sigh, pulled it out. My hands were shaking again. It wasn't a recipe. It was a birth certificate. A copy, yellowed with age. I looked at the name. Robert Charles Reynolds. And then I looked at the parents' names. Charles Thomas Reynolds and Diane Marie Thompson. My breath left me in a rush. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. The date on the certificate. It was 3 years before Walter was born. 3 years before I ever met Charles. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't a lie. It was a whole other life. The boy in the photo, he was Charles's son, his first son. And his mother was Diane, the woman I had called my best friend, the woman who had told me that she was happy for me when Charles chose me. All those years, all those times we spent together, all those Sunday brunches, a whole other family was living right there in plain sight. I sat down hard in the chair, the paper fluttering to the floor. The relief I had felt just moments before was gone, replaced by a cold, numbing horror. I hadn't been protecting my son. I had been protecting a lie that was so much bigger, so much older than I ever imagined. The cold stone in my gut had shattered, and now there was nothing left but a gaping hole. My husband had a son he never told me about. And I had a son too, who had no idea. What do you do when you find out your entire life was a lie? When you realize the man you loved wasn't yours to begin with, and the woman you hated was just the mother of his child? What happens now? What do I tell Walter? And what about Robert Charles Reynolds? Who is he?
The birth certificate lay on the kitchen floor, but I didn't need to look at it to know it was real. Robert Charles Reynolds. I kept saying his name in my head over and over again, trying to wrap my mind around it. A whole other child, a whole other family, right under my nose. My anger, which had been a cold stone, now felt like a raging fire. My hands weren't just shaking now, they were clenched into fists. I didn't care about the rain, my aching back, or the quiet life I had so carefully built. I grabbed my car keys, slammed the front door, and drove back to Diane's house. I wasn't just a woman seeking answers. I was a woman on a mission. This wasn't a conversation anymore. This was a confrontation. I didn't bother ringing the bell this time. I knocked hard, the sound echoing through the empty street. The door opened slowly. It was Diane, looking even more fragile than before. Her eyes were wide with surprise, maybe even fear. "Helen, you came back," she said, her voice thin. "Don't,"
I snapped, my voice a furious whisper. Don't pretend this is a friendly visit. I shoved past her and into the living room where the empty box still lay on the floor. You told me to give this to Walter, but you didn't tell me what was inside. You didn't tell me about this. My voice cracked on the last word. You didn't tell me about Robert. Diane's face, already pale, went as white as a sheet. She sank into her armchair, clutching the arms of the chair like a life preserver. I knew you'd find it. I was a fool to think you wouldn't. A fool, I scoffed, pacing the room, the anger making me feel dizzy. You were a liar. You were a fraud. You let me live my whole life with a lie? My husband, my best friend. You had a son together? Before I even met him? Before Walter was even born? I stopped in front of her, tears blurring my vision. All those years, all those dinners, those holidays. You watched me raise Walter and you knew you had a son with my husband. Did Charles know? She closed her eyes, a single tear escaping and tracing a path down her wrinkled cheek. He never knew, she whispered. I swear to God, Helen, he never knew. My breath hitched. He never knew? How could he not know? What do you mean he didn't know? I demanded. It was a mistake, she said, her voice barely audible. We were young. We were just friends, and it just happened. He was with you by the time I found out. I couldn't tell him. He was so happy. I couldn't ruin that. She looked at me, her eyes pleading. I didn't want him to choose. I didn't want him to leave you. So I gave up Robert for adoption. The words hit me like a physical blow. Adoption. You gave up your son? I asked, the rage giving way to a sickening confusion. You gave up his son? She nodded now, sobbing, a raw, terrible sound. But I never forgot him. I found him years later. I've been watching him. He's a good man, Helen. He's a wonderful man. And Walter? I asked, my voice trembling. What did any of this have to do with Walter? She said with her voice suddenly stronger. I couldn't tell you the whole truth, not yet. But I knew you needed to know. The box, it wasn't just for Walter. It's for both of you. It's for you to understand and for Walter to finally meet his brother. I stumbled back, my hands flying to my mouth. His brother. My husband's son wasn't just a ghost from the past. He was a living, breathing person who was now somehow connected to my son. I felt the floor giving way beneath me. Meet his brother, I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. What do you mean? Robert, she said, her eyes fixed on me. Robert Reynolds. He's the one building the new community center, the architect. He works with Walter. My mind went blank. The world around me started to spin. Walter had told me about a new colleague, a brilliant architect named Robert, a man he admired, a man he was meeting for lunch next week to discuss a new project. My son was about to meet his half-brother, a man he didn't even know existed, a man his father never knew he had. I just stood there, the birth certificate fluttering from my hand to the floor, my whole life collapsing around me. The betrayal was so much more than a forgotten affair. It was a lie that was now about to reach out and touch my son's life in a way I never could have imagined. What do I do now? What does any of this mean for Walter, for Robert, for me?
I left Diane's house in a daze. The world outside looked the same, but it was all different now. Walter and Robert, half-brothers, architects, meeting for lunch. My mind kept trying to put the pieces together, but they didn't fit. It was a cruel, impossible irony. I drove home, but I couldn't remember the drive. My hands were on the steering wheel, but I felt disconnected, like I was watching someone else's life on a movie screen. I got back to my silent house and the kitchen table, where the birth certificate still lay. Next to it was the scrapbook and the cardboard box. I looked at it all, and for the first time, I felt a kind of quiet. The hot, furious anger was gone, replaced by a cold, unsettling dread. I sat down and picked up the scrapbook again,
flipping through the pages, my fingers tracing the faded photos of a young Charles. He was so handsome, so full of life. It made my heart ache. I had been so angry with him for the lie, for the betrayal, for the son I never knew about. But then I remembered what Diane said. He never knew. I had dismissed it in my anger, but now the words came back, a quiet echo in my mind. Could it be true? Could the man I loved have been a victim too? I picked up the box, my hand still trembling. I needed to find a reason, a clue, something that made sense of all this. The box was almost empty, but then I noticed something. A small piece of paper, folded and tucked into the very bottom, beneath the layers of brown packing tape. It was an old piece of stationery, the kind with a faint watermark. I unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was familiar. It was Charles. A note to himself. It was dated a few months before we met. I saw Diane today. She said she's leaving town. Said it was for the best. She told me the baby wasn't mine. Said I needed to forget about it. That it was a mistake. I just don't understand. The math doesn't add up. How could it not be mine? I want to believe her. I want to forget. But I can't. I feel like I lost a piece of me I never even knew I had. Maybe I should just let it go. Maybe it's just her way of letting me down easy. God, I hope she's right. I read the note again and again, the words blurred behind my tears. A baby. His baby. That he thought wasn't his. My entire worldview shattered in that one moment. The man I loved hadn't kept a secret life. He had been carrying a broken heart. He hadn't been a betrayer. He had been betrayed. Diane hadn't just lied to me, she had lied to him. All those years ago, she had taken away his chance to be a father, to know his own son. And she took away his peace. The quiet melancholy that sometimes settled on him, the look in his eyes when he saw a father and son playing catch in the park. I had always thought it was about his own father, a man he had a complicated relationship with. But it wasn't. It was about a son he thought he had lost. I looked at the birth certificate and then back at the note. He had been telling the truth. The key pin, it wasn't a symbol of their love. It was a secret, a symbol of a lie she told him, a child she took away from him. My anger shifted. It wasn't pointed at Charles anymore. It was aimed at a woman who had spent a lifetime lying, a woman who had given away a child and, with her last breath, tried to fix everything by placing the burden on me. I now held not one, but two truths: a son I never knew about, and a husband who died without ever knowing he had him. So what does a person do when they find out the man they spent their life hating for a betrayal was really a man broken by it? And what do I do with this new truth? Do I share it? Or do I let everyone think what they want and let a man's final secret die with me? The note lay on the table, a flimsy piece of paper holding the weight of 40 years. My fury was gone, replaced by a quiet, aching sorrow. The stone in my gut was no longer a stone of anger, but a heavy weight of grief for a man who had carried a secret wound his whole life. My poor Charles. The man I loved was not the betrayer. He was the one who had been betrayed. He had lost a son, and he had lived his life believing it wasn't his. Diane, she hadn't just lied to me. She had robbed him of a fatherhood he so desperately wanted. I sat there for hours, the birth certificate and Charles's note spread out on the kitchen table. The rain outside had stopped, and the sun was just beginning to peek through the clouds. It felt like the dawn of a new, terrifying, and beautiful day. I knew what I had to do. The past was no longer something to be buried. It was a truth that needed to be uncovered, a debt that needed to be paid. I had to tell Welter. It was the only morally clear path left. I couldn't let Charles's memory be a lie anymore. I picked up the phone and dialed my son's number. It rang once, twice, and then he answered, his voice bright and cheerful. "Mom, what's up?" he asked. "Everything okay?" "Walter, I need you to come over. Right now. I have something to show you. It's about Dad." He didn't ask questions, he just said he was on his way. The hour I waited for him was the longest hour of my life. I didn't clean anything up. I didn't hide the note or the certificate. I left them all on the table, a testament to a life I never knew. When he arrived, his face was full of concern. He saw the papers, the open scrapbook, and the serious look on my face. "Mom, what is this?" he asked, his voice low and worried. "Sit down, honey," I said, gesturing to the chair across from me. He sat, and I pushed the papers toward him. "Your father, he had a secret." I watched as his eyes scanned the birth certificate, the name Robert Charles Reynolds, the names of the parents. His face was a mixture of confusion and shock. Then I pushed the note from Charles toward him. I watched as his eyes read his father's familiar handwriting, his expression changing from confusion to a deep, heartbreaking sadness. He was seeing his father, the strong, steady man he had always known, in a way he had never seen before. A broken, young man with a painful secret. He didn't know?" he whispered, looking up at me, his eyes full of tears. "He didn't know he had a son?" I shook my head, my own tears finally falling. "No, honey, he didn't. Diane lied to both of us, to everyone. She thought she was doing the right thing, I guess. But he lived with that for his entire life, thinking he had lost a child that wasn't his." Walter was quiet for a long time, just staring at the note, his hand shaking. I could see the anger in his eyes, but it wasn't for his father. It was for Diane. And then he looked at me, a soft, understanding look in his eyes. "Mom," he said, his voice raw. "All this time you thought he betrayed you? And he was sad?" I nodded, unable to speak. The pain was still there, but it was a shared pain now, a pain that brought us closer. We weren't just a mother and son dealing with the past, we were two people finally understanding the man they loved. We talked for hours, piecing together the small details from the scrapbook, the moments that suddenly made sense in a new, terrible light. "We have to find him," Walter said, finally, his voice firm. "Robert. We have to tell him. He needs to know his father wasn't just a name on a piece of paper." And just like that, the path was clear. It wasn't a path to a happy ending, not yet, but it was a path to clarity, to truth, and to the forgiveness that had been waiting for all of us for so very long. We had a long way to go, so many people to talk to, and so many truths to tell. It wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long time, it felt right. So, what do you do when you find out the man you loved was a man broken by a lie? You tell his story, you honor his pain, and you make sure his son finally knows his name.
The sun was shining now, bright and warm, but the world was still new. Walter and I sat at the kitchen table, the papers between us like an old, complicated map, the map of a life we never knew existed. We talked, not with anger, but with a quiet, shared sorrow. We spoke of Charles, a man who was now more complex, more human than the memory we had kept. My Charles, a man who carried a heartbreak I never knew, a man who never knew he had a son, my heart ached for him, not with the old grief, but with a new, profound sadness. Walter, with a determination that reminded me so much of his father, took out his phone. He had Robert's contact information,
an email address, and a phone number he had found in the company directory. "Mom," he said, his voice firm, "I'll call him. I'll tell him I'd like to get coffee, talk about the new project. We can meet him. Together." I just nodded, my hands wrapped around a mug of hot tea. My back still ached and my ears still rang with the echo of that phone call, but for the first time in a long time, the weight on my shoulders felt a little lighter. We had a plan, a difficult, uncertain plan, but it was a path forward. We weren't just reacting to the past anymore. We were building a future, a new future for a family that didn't know it was broken. A few days later, we met Robert at a small coffee shop downtown. He was just as Walter had described him, tall, with a kind face and intelligent eyes. He had Charles's eyes. It was uncanny. When he shook my hand, I felt a jolt, a strange connection to a man I had only just met. We talked about Walter's work, about the new community center, and about the neighborhood. He was a good man, a wonderful man, just as Diane had said. Walter and I didn't mention the note, the scrapbook, or the birth certificate. We just sat there, two people meeting a third, all of us carrying a secret we had yet to share. As I sat there, looking at Robert, I saw Charles. I saw the quiet strength, the thoughtful way he listened, and I felt a pang of something new, something that wasn't sorrow or anger. It was forgiveness, not just for Diane, but for the universe, for the cruelty of the lie, for the years lost. Forgiveness for myself, for the anger I had held onto for so long, and for a life I thought was perfect, but was really just waiting for the truth to be found. I came home and sat in my armchair, the same armchair where it all began. The rain had stopped, and the sun was setting, casting a beautiful orange glow through the window. The house was quiet, but it wasn't empty anymore. It felt full of ghosts, but not the scary kind. The kind that have finally found their peace. The kind that can rest. I looked at the old photo album on the shelf, the one with the pictures of Charles and me. A whole life. A beautiful life. A life I wouldn't trade for anything. And now, a new chapter was about to begin. A new family was about to be born, right from the ashes of the old one. I still don't have all the answers. I still don't know what I'll say to Robert or what he'll say to us. I don't know what the future holds. But I do know this. The stone is gone from my stomach. The anger is gone. There's just a quiet, a fragile hope, a family I never knew I had. So tell me, was it just a story about a secret and a lie? Or was it a story about a second chance at love? A love for a man I thought I knew, a love for a son I thought I had, and a love for a family I was just about to meet.